named most anticipated book of 2022 by the Washington Post, Oprah Daily, Vulture, Harper's Bazaar, and so many more. You made a fool of after you reviewed Cesar Mezi's inevitably vivid and passionate voice took readers deep into a world of possibility and healing and the constant bravery of choosing to love against all odds. Emezi will be joined by Nick Stone, author and moderator, who was born and raised in the suburb of Atlanta. And the only thing she loves more than adventure is a good story about one. After graduating from Spelman College, Stone worked extensively in team mentoring and lived in Israel for a few years before returning to the U.S. to write full-time. Growing up with a wide range of cultures, religions, and backgrounds, Stone strives to bring these diverse voices and stories into her work, where you can find her goofing off and or fangirling over her adorable little family on most social media platforms. Her books include Dear Martin, Odd One Out, and Clean Getaway. And after Nick Stone's questions, look to those index cards to ask your own without any further ado. Finally, please welcome.
I have to make sure not to flash anyone. So if you see anything, don't say anything.
Well, I missed the piano and took the jackass way up to the stage, so. Oh my gosh, there's people. It's so lovely to see all of you. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Nick. This is Quay. You can't call them that. Only I can. And we are here to talk about a book that ruined my life. I hope all of you are ready to be ruined as well. So, as you can see, I'm dressed in all black. That was on purpose, and the reason for that will become apparent as we get into this discussion. But first, I think you knew I was going to ask this. Why romance, Akwaeke?
So thank you all for being here. As always, it is an utter delight. I started reading romance novels when I was a preteen.
Ooh, you nasty.
I mean, I was also that child who was like reading through the entire Bible, just trying to find all the sex scenes. There are a lot.
There
And
are.
they're really
there
perverted.
absolutely are,
Like,
and
they're
they are
dark.
intense.
You should actually not let children do that. And in my high school, there was a thriving economy of Harlequin and Mills and Boon's romance novels that all our teachers immediately banned us from reading, and we proceeded to completely ignore them and trade them in, again, the thriving black market of preteens who will not be stopped from reading whatever they want to read. And I came to the States, I was still a teenager, honestly, I was a teenager all through college. I graduated college when I was 19, so I was just a teenager for a very long time, it felt like. And I discovered paranormal romance. Ooh. And I was like, fucking and shapeshifters. Great. And I just kind of came back around to it because it's one of my favorite genres to read. I really like that and I say this often about the genre, you have a soft place to land.
Yeah.
That everything's going to be okay at the end. And I need that personally, given the world that we're in.
Oh, yes.
I very much need a soft place to land. So I think I wrote this book actually in 2020. I wrote it right after I wrote Bitter, and Bitter kicked my ass, and I was like, I'm done with serious, heavy stuff. I just want to have fun. I want to remember what it felt like to write as a kid and to read as a kid, and romance was it.
Yeah. And I love how different it's you. It's so you. The prose is it's like Oreo stuffed New York cheesecake with cherries and stuff on top. I'm a writer too. No. But I want you to bless us by reading, if you don't mind. Give us a bit.
I will. I'm reading the opening scene because that's what Nick said I
Because
should read.
I asked him to.
Chapter 1. Milan was the first person Faye had fucked since the accident. They hooked up in a bathroom at a Memorial Day house party in Bushwick, with Faye's glass of Prosecco spilling into the sink and Milan's large hands sliding behind her thighs as he lifted her onto the bathroom counter. Speckled tiles stretched around them, washed bloody in the light of the red bulb someone had screwed into the ceiling, and a linen shower curtain hung around the bathtub, thick with monstera leaves. Faye threw her head back, his mouth at her throat, and her long pink braids dripped over the faucet, the tips dragging against the draining bubbles of her drink. "Tell me if you need to slow down," Milan said, his voice all tangled up, busy with want. "I know we just met or whatever." He said it as if it could matter, or as if it was a reason to stop instead of a reason to go even faster. Faye had first seen him back on the rooftop when the party was in full force around them. She'd liked the way his eyes followed her as she walked, how tall he was, how broad. Her best friend Joy had leaned in, linking her arm with Faye's. "Woo, check out those thighs," she'd whispered. "He thick as fuck. I'm gonna need him to turn around so I can see that ass." Faye had rolled her eyes. "So glad you don't have a dick," she said. "You'd be a fucking menace." "I'd be particularly interested in his ass if I had a dick," Joy replied. "I take that back. You're already a menace." Faye snuck another look at the thighs in question. "Besides, you can just use a strap, you know?" "Nah, it's not the same. I want to feel him squeeze around me." Joy had flexed her fingers into a fist to illustrate the grip, and Faye stifled a laugh, her braids sweeping across her collarbone. Milan glanced in their direction, catching Faye's eyes and smiling at her from across the roof. Faye had already decided who she wanted to be that night, so she stared right back at him, unabashed, drinking in his terracotta skin and dark copper beard. When he nodded to his boys and started walking toward her, Joy squealed and vanished, leaving the two of them alone. Faye wanted to cut through any potential small talk, just slice it away neatly, so she touched the buttons of Milan's shirt as soon as he was close enough. "You're hot," she said, before he could even open his mouth. "Are you seeing anyone?" A flicker of surprise had crossed his face, but Milan recovered quickly. "Nah," he replied, tipping his head to one side as he held her eyes. "You?" For a moment, there was the scream of tires and the mad chime of broken glass, the soft petals of white lilies, and a clod of dirt breaking apart in Faye's hand. But she brushed it all aside like smoke. "Single," she'd said in return, stepping right into his personal space. He smelled of rain and bergamot. And, how do they say it? Ready to mingle. It would have been a corny line if she wasn't so beautiful, and Faye knew it, knew how to part her lips in their full wine red, how to look up at him from under thick black lashes, how to inject a lifetime of suggestion into her voice. It was all a game, a simple formula, and there was nothing wrong in using the cards she'd been dealt. Besides, if she looked closely enough at the whole thing, none of it really mattered. He was a different kind of beautiful, and that was enough.
I made the mistake of reading that scene on an airplane next to a very straight-laced white businessman. And I was whoo, whoo, just making all kinds of noises. Within that scene you just read, I think we get like the essence of how you tell stories. You have this way, that braid is gonna get on my nerves. You have this way of literally pinging on every emotion. Y'all, within the 5 minutes she just read, did you just feel everything? I felt sadness, I felt shock. I was scandalized for a second and I was like, ooh, 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 I like that. Happy, devastated. How do you do that?
I think I follow what feels true. I think. Like, these are all the things that are happening. These are all the things that like Faye's feeling. You know, like yes, she's hooking up with someone in a bathroom, but she's also having flashbacks to like losing the love of her life at the same time. And I think that's what grief is like. You know, it doesn't actually leave you. It doesn't actually stop. It's there even through the moments that are, you know, steamy, the moments that are mundane. And I think that's also like what life is. It's like the tangle of everything all at once.
Yeah, your books are so delightfully human. I've been really stuck on this idea of humanity lately. And humanity in its fullness, where we are not like sloughing away pieces of ourselves that we feel are not acceptable. And this is a book that is basically that times infinity, right? So we have Faye in this opening scene doing something that she has never done before and just being real gung ho about it. And then she feels things about it. And I like that we get this full range. But you did mention grief. I am, like I said, wearing all black because there's a lot of grief in this book. There's a lot of grief in this world. Honestly, on the way here, I learned about there was a shooting at an elementary school in Texas today, and I was thinking about how to talk about a romance novel when things like that are going on in the world. And then I was like, this is the perfect book for us to have a discussion around loss and grief and things that just don't make sense. So I'm curious as to why you decided to lean into grief so heavily, because there's a lot of it in the book and it doesn't weigh it down. So like, tell me why you leaned into it, and also like, how did you do that? I'm just going to be getting craft tips all night.
You know, I had no intention of doing that whatsoever. I was trying to write a fluffy little book, and then Faye showed up, and I was like, okay. And she showed up with, you know, all this complexity that I wasn't expecting. I really wasn't planning to write like another book about grief because the death of Vivek Orji literally exists. um, but but I think again, there's just so much grief in the world
Yeah.
that it feels threaded through everything. There's a quote, and this is going to sound terrible. I don't know what book it's from of mine, but it's something about the world churning on, bloody and something else, as sacrilegious as it sounds. And that's one thing that always kind of hit me about grief is that the world doesn't stop. It doesn't stop for anyone. And I think that's one of the most isolating things about grief is that you know that you, when it's yours, when it belongs to you, or when you belong to it, you are going to be like temporarily stuck there for much longer than everyone else. And people will, you know, be around you, but they'll move on because the world moves on. And sometimes that's, you know, a terribly callous thing. It feels like the world should stop,
Yeah.
but it doesn't. And I think with when Faye showed up, she was trying to figure out how, like when she showed up as a character to me, she was trying to figure out how to like catch up with the world,
Yeah.
how to get her world, you know, moving again. In the book, her husband's been dead for 5 years, and she's been just kind of making art in between. But her art is about her grief. So even in that, she's still like in this bubble, in this like diving bell of grief. And the opening scene with Milan is her trying to break out of it. And throughout the book, that's something that she's trying to do is trying to figure out how to be alive again and still dealing with the fact that the grief won't leave her alone.
Yeah.
You know, she still has nightmares about losing the love of her life. She still has, you know, these flashbacks. She's been irrevocably changed by her grief. And in writing the book, I follow my characters. You know, I'm like, okay, you tell me where you're going, and I'll follow along. And she was just carrying so much of it with her, but not in a bad way, just in a like, this is woven into the fabric of who I am. And this is such an intimate part of me that in her dating life, it was like a glass wall
Yeah.
between her and other people. It was like, how can you understand me if you've never experienced a grief of this magnitude? How can I be legible to you? How can we, be intimate? And that, I think, is one of the things that connects her to her love interest in the book.
Yep, that's exactly what I was about to say. Because while it is separating from her from people, we also see it connect her to so many people. Like I remember reading, I'm not gonna give the spoiler, but like there's a thing that we learn toward the end about a specific character that I was like, oh, him too. Like there are just these moments where the connections between people are rooted in grief, which is not something you see very frequently. I think grief is something that we're typically running from. So it makes me think of this thing my therapist said to me one time, because y'all, I hate being sad. It's just so annoying. Like, I'd be like, but why? I don't want to be crying in the corner anymore. But my therapist said,
I'm dying to know what your therapist said at this point.
the depth at which you feel sorrow matches the height at which you can feel joy. And I feel like we get so much of that in this book. How do you manage, honestly, even in your own life, to balance those two things? Because we see Faye experiencing this immense grief. We see other characters, including Aleem, experiencing this immense grief. But it also creates this space for them to go sky high with good feelings. Have you experienced that? And like, how do you infuse it into the work?
I think the work is part of that. Like being able to write these stories, honestly, being able to exist inside these stories specifically. It's, I think, common knowledge at this point that I am not a fan of this world at all. And, and the grief for me is consuming and has been my entire life, like even when I was a child. And I've spent a lifetime trying to figure out how to like map my way out of it. And like personal success or personal milestones don't actually help. I was describing it to my therapist about as
Therapy. Okay.
I was describing it to my therapist as, like, yeah, the books were successful. I was able to have like housing stability and financial stability in a way I didn't have before. But I was like, it just feels like I built a lifeboat. And I'm like, and what am I supposed to do about everyone else who's still drowning? Just ignore that and like live happily in my lifeboat? And I was like, that's not going to happen. And I was like, and I can't get everyone into my lifeboat. And if I jump out of my lifeboat, I'm going to die. And my therapist was like, you can invite the people you love to take breaks on your lifeboat. But he was like, at some point, like everyone kind of has to build their own lifeboat. And then we talk about capitalism because it's not people's fault that they can't build their own lifeboats because no one has the resources to build their own lifeboats. And we need to build lifeboats together. And still, I think the thing that's hardest for me about the grief of existing and the grief of embodiment is that it does not matter. And sorry, this is going to be like really like pessimistic, but I'm like, it does not actually matter because at least to me, it does not matter what I do or how much I do because I'm like, it's never going to stop everyone from suffering. I can't fix it all. And we're not supposed to because communities and organizing and, doing it together. But even then, it's still, you could do it for a lifetime. And we somehow ended up in this dystopia where it's not enough. The scale is just too big. And I think one of the things I was trying to figure out through this book is how do you like enjoy life while knowing that so many other people can't. And like, what do you do with that like tangle of guilt and helplessness and just knowing again that, nothing's going to be enough. On my darker days, I take it to the point where I'm like, it is actually impossible to like feel or be present to joy unless you have just dissociated and cut off
Completely.
from the suffering of other people. And then I remember it's like this is like the seesaw that's happening in my mind all the time. And then I remember, like no one is supposed to be able to hold all the suffering in the world. That's literally impossible. It's an unrealistic standard to hold yourself to, is to be constantly aware of all the suffering. This suffering is not natural. The scale of it is not natural. It is not a failure to not be able to hold all that suffering. And honestly, when I never find a solution in like this realm, and one of my best friends always reminds me to like move spirit first about it and just be like, this world is not like, it's not yours, it's not your responsibility, like that is in God's hands. And what is your, like, to pull it back to the center of like, what is your job, what does God want you to do for me? And I know I'm not allowed to die, which would honestly be my preferred thing. It's just like, no. But, but I'm not allowed to, and I found it out several times in a hard way. And so I had a former therapist once who I was talking to her about it and talking to her about like the suicidal ideation and the suffering and the proximity of death and all of that. And she looked at me and she was like, "But you're so alive." She's like, literally, look at your house. She's like, everything about you is like bright and colorful and like exploding with life. And I was like, huh, that's a good point. You bring up there. And then, life and death are really like two sides of the same coin. And it becomes like this whole existential thing. But from a spirit first perspective, my best friend, who's kind of like my spiritual advisor, essentially, was just like, for me and for my spiritual path, this thing of, being a deity's child, being a god, and what my relationship to like the larger God is. And she said, opulence pleases God. Like, to live the way that you were created to live, to be as bright and as colorful, and to live with all of that is the assignment. To live amidst all the grief, to still find your way to the light is the assignment. And that, I think, is what I kind of hold on to in the middle of all the grief. And I think that's what I tried for like Faye to hold on to, is how to chase the light, how to chase, that feeling of being alive. And despite her wildly unpopular apparently choices in the book,
Whatever.
that's what she's doing, like she's chasing life.
Anytime you ask me to do an event, I'm going to say yes because I like learn so much when I'm asking questions. The way that you're able to, there's a quote, my favorite quote from this book, which is going on my body. There are
She's not kidding.
I'm not kidding. I have a tattoo that goes on my shoulder of like quotes from friends' books in their handwriting. And the one from this book, the one from this book is, there are so many terrible feelings that come with being alive. Let's talk about Faye, because Faye makes what I think are some immaculate decisions, personally.
I mean, likewise.
And I think that, though, because they are so, what the hell she wants, First of all, I do want to thank you for validating and normalizing queer relationships between people of different genders, especially ones that are like head passing. So seeing a queer woman and a queer man get together was just like, yes, this exists, And that was a really powerful thing for me. So I actually want you to talk about why you made that decision, because a lot of people wouldn't have.
I sometimes I struggle to think of which of my protagonists is straight.
Yeah.
And
I mean, none of them should be, in my opinion, just saying.
And I just couldn't really imagine like a love interest who was like a cishet man. I was like, oh, but I was like, I think my imagination could do better. And with Faye's love interest, I really wanted to write a black bisexual man who was accepted and loved by his partner, and it was just like, oh, cool, you're bi, I'm bi, great, and just have that, be it. And when we were closing like the movie deal, it was something that I actually like fought really hard to stay in the contract
Yeah.
for it, where I was just like, you cannot change his sexuality because if it makes it to screen, I want that to be there. I want two dark-skinned, black, queer people on screen. And that was, that was really important to me. And also, I just think he was sexier that way.
You're not wrong at all. Like, I had some moments where I was like, oh, girl, okay. But you have this way also. So one of my favorite things about this book is the way that you juxtapose different types of masculinity. I don't know if this was on purpose, but I'd be in.
Go ahead and make me sound smart.
Like, I'd be digging in here. But I think about, so Faye meets a number of men in this book, and each of them is completely different. And I loved that, but I really loved the juxtaposition of Nasir and Aleem. I am not telling you all the relationship of these characters to each other because no spoilers, and it's just so much better when you read it and you're like, oh shit, you're gonna have that moment. But Nasir, the way that he is masculine is very toxic at times, and also very the typical conditioning, I think. Aleem, on the other hand, I wanted to marry Aleem. There was a softness, but that softness, like oftentimes I feel like when people think of masculinity, they think of it as a binary, right? Just like people are dumb and think of a lot of things as binaries. But I want you to talk about how you juxtapose these two men and why. Because they are both people that Faye interacts with.
So Alan is quite secretly just like a fantasy in my head where I was just like, I'm gonna make you real. I'm gonna make you a person. He's a Michelin star chef.
I was so hungry reading this book. So hungry.
There's a lot of food in the book.
So much food.
And I think more importantly, he's gentle. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's easier to write like the other guys because I've met so many of them. But I really wanted to write someone who had made, like a choice.
Yeah.
To be gentle. Who was, living in, because like he's bisexual and he lives in the Caribbean and he's openly bisexual. And I wanted to write someone who had like made these choices to be not only like true to himself but also to stay gentle amidst all of that. And I don't even know if I was like consciously juxtaposing it, but I mean, Faye was like going through this, it's like Goldilocks. But the porridge is dicks. No, the porridge is people.
They said it, not me.
And she's trying to figure out, who she feels safe with, who she feels comfortable with. And she does feel safe with all the different men in all these different ways. But then she meets Alam, and he's a kind of safety beyond what she imagined. And I think that's like my favorite part about imagining things or like fantasies or really just unknown worlds where it's like you can imagine things, but what if what you get is actually better than that? And you, by definition of like this whole scenario, you can't imagine it It's beyond the realm of your imagination. And I think there's something really powerful about running into a person or a situation that exceeds the boundaries of your own mind. I think there's something really intoxicating about it and something humbling about it because it shows you that there's so much more than what you thought. It shows you your own limits. It like brings you up against your own horizon and then it blows it open to something beyond that. I felt like that, I think, about different stages in my career, like different things about the work where I was like, oh, I did not imagine this at all. This is so far beyond anything I imagined. This just did not exist. And yet, here it is. And I think that's like the journey Faye makes from like all these men who she could like very much imagine who are kind of standard, and all of a sudden the horizon blows open and Alim is there. And it's like, oh, this exists.
And then she's like, run away for a good chunk, for a good reason, because Nasir's very different. So when you were writing Nasir, you said, I mean, it's easy. You've encountered a lot of Nasirs in your life. But I want to know more about his character. Like, I want to know more about like where he comes from.
I actually think that the people I knew in real life were not even as nice as Nasir.
Nasir's so nice until he's not, but then he gets it together.
Yeah, and he's just Sorry, I just had like a realization. I was like, Nasir's probably me, if I was a man. Like,
Well, that's enlightening.
like specifically like me in my toxic 20s, so when you meet Nasir in the book, he's very intense. He's very much just like, hello, you and me.
Yes.
And that was me in Brooklyn in my 20s, just blazing my way through people, and it was always very intense. It was this thing of like, I've met you and I don't know what this thing is, and I think it's a storyteller skill.
It is.
It's like when you're seduced by a storyteller and they're like, look at this world, isn't it neat? and it's like seductive and all of that, but you're actually just a character to them. And I say that very much because I realized when I was writing my memoir actually that I actually didn't like most of the people that I thought I liked. I liked the character I had created in my head of them, and quite frankly, I thought that my character was better than them. In retrospect, I stand by that. And it's all magical and stuff as long as the person stays in character.
Yeah.
And then when they slip out of character, then, truths come out. And then, like the ugly side of people come out. As it did with me when I was, a fuckboy. And I think that's what we see with Nasir, is somebody who is playing a part, even if he doesn't realize he's playing a part. Like, everything is a story. The person he's pursuing is a story. We're all in this, magical world together until there's a real challenge. And then the story falls apart. And you get to see the person underneath the story. And then you see like both people in that story are not the perfect little characters.
Yeah.
And then you learn a lot about like the character of the character. You learn a lot about them by how they handle that fallout, by what their response to it is.
I'm still mad. I'm not even gonna lie. So last question from me, because I'm sure you all have questions. So the last question from me, like if I had to, Faye really, like her character arc, we see her go from this person with voices inside of her head that are not hers, right? Like, I feel like a lot of the things that she tells herself are things that are learned. They're not necessarily her truth. They are a truth that she has taken on. But as she comes out of her shell, she learns how to not only differentiate between her own voice and these other voices, but how to just make them shut the fuck up. right? And I want to know, in writing that arc for her, how did you change?
That's a great question. When Nick says voices, she doesn't mean like freshwater voices. It's just like it's just like the regular kind. um, and and so with Faye, you know, she's got a little bit of like a, how do I put it, like a respectability cop in her head. And I think her best friend Joy is like really pivotal
Oh, God.
to helping her unlearn a lot of just a lot of the things that she's feeling around what she should or shouldn't be doing. And I think for me, I learned that, you know, in writing Faye, she did make choices that I wouldn't now because I'm older. The choices, like 20 something year old me made much worse choices. Like Faye is mild. I was like, she's not even really doing anything. um, but you know what I learned wasn't even so much in writing her, because in writing her she felt very like normal, like very familiar. I was like, yeah, this is me. This is what my friends were like. Like this all makes sense. I think it was, you know, when like the advanced copies of the book started going out and the book started like racking up like Goodreads reviews, like pre-pub. And I realized that like those voices that she's working against are real, which I had forgotten about because it's been so long since I was in like, you know, a community or a friend circle of people who really subscribe to respectability politics. Like it's been over a decade. So I kind of forgot that they exist.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of like writing the book, and then I was like reading people's reactions to the book. And, you know, a lot of people were like very uncomfortable with the profanity, for example. And I was just like, I didn't know we were still doing that.
Hey, are we not grown?
I was like, okay, all right. And I think with the reviews, you know, I learn a lot more about readers than I do about my work. But people had such strong feelings about Faye's choices. And that I was like, oh, this is going to be a good book, right? Because this is really opening up a conversation about like dating ethics. And I was like, this is a fascinating conversation to me because what she's doing is something that men do all the time. And no one says anything about it. But when she does it, people are just like, oh no, she makes the worst choices ever. I read a review, I think, like earlier today, where someone was like, Nasir didn't deserve the treatment that was given to him, and people were gaslighting him. And I was just like, it'll make sense when you read the book. I was just like, oh, okay.
Like, he'll be fine.
And I think by the end of it, like when I got a sense of a more like the public's reaction to it,
Yeah.
like that specific like sets of people, I was like, oh, so this is necessary in a way that I didn't even think it was.
Yes.
Because a huge part of like respectability politics around dating is around who deserves a happy ending. And it's surely not the queer slut fucking her way through Brooklyn, you know, and who faces like no consequences for anything. Because, and in my opinion, why should she?
Why should she?
You know? But I think when you date in this like respectable, like kind of pick me, you know, world where it's like you're supposed to follow the rules, and then these rules, you know, will get you a man, and then, you know, all of this, when you see someone like Faye who isn't following any of the rules whatsoever and still gets, you know, a happily ever after, that can be a little, you know, hard to read. And I think it's important in that sense. I'm like, people should get their happily ever afters, even if they're not subscribing to like these horrible dating protocols.
Yeah, especially since they don't make no damn sense in the first place.
Facts.
Okay. Were there any romance tropes that you actively avoided in this novel? And how did you bend the genre? I could totally write a thesis on this book, so I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
So with bending the genre, I think the biggest thing about it is that the first man she meets is not the man she ends up with, which is not usually how it works in romance. I mean, the second man she meets is also not the man she ends up with. And you know, we actually had to rework the jacket copy for it because at first it didn't have the twist on it. So if you don't like spoilers, don't read the jacket copy. I'm telling you now, just take off the jacket copy and like hide it somewhere, and then just read the book. And the first draft of the first version of the jacket copy on like the early galleys didn't have the twist in it. But what was happening was that people were getting to like guy number 2 and like sensing that there was something wrong in the relationship, and then they would just stop reading the book because they were like, I don't like this romance. And I was like, it's not the right guy. That's why you don't like it. And then for some people, the twist was like deeply unpleasant and like very shocking. It was just a lot of like mixed reactions. And I was like, you know what? Let's just put the twist on the jacket, because in romance, you always know who the person is going to end up with. So I was like, that to me is not a spoiler in the genre, but for a lot of people, it still is a spoiler. So it's like trying to like walk this fine line where instead of trying to kind of direct the book towards people who, you know, weren't going to like, you know, the profanity and how, you know, vulgar it is, I was like, let's go the other way. Let's direct the book to people who are just like, mess.
Yes.
Yes.
Me.
Like, who would read the jacket cover and be like, oh, that sounds like
This
a
is
disaster.
fantastic.
I'm so ready for it. Like, inserts the Marie Kondo gif here. and and so I think that was like the bendy thing, you know, was having her move through these men before she actually ends up with the one she ends up with. And what was the first part? The
Tropes you avoided.
you know, one of the tropes that I truly, truly hate with the passion of 1,000 suns is the one where like the guy's an asshole and the woman is like, oh, you're so mean to me and you make me cry, but you're a dick. And then he like seduces her like rather forcibly, and she's like, oh, I hate that I want you. And I was just like, that's not sexy. Like, that's just annoying, actually. And I think that's part of why Alam is so gentle and very responsible, you know, and they have conversations before things. And I don't like, and I think people think like that's an enemies to lovers trope, but then someone on Twitter rightfully pointed out that true enemies to lovers isn't, oh, we're workplace, you know, nemesis, or like we hate each other at work. It's, I'm trying to assassinate you.
Yes.
Like I want you dead. And I'm just like, yes, that is the quality enemies to lovers. But I didn't want that kind of like antagonism between them. I wanted it to be tender throughout, even when it was difficult, even when they were arguing. I wanted that gentleness to, you know, to still be present.
You mentioned you turned to romance and fun after Bitter. How was the experience balancing fun and seriousness? Was there something from this process of writing romance you think you will carry forward into other genres? This is an excellent set of questions.
It was great writing romance after Bitter. It did not feel like work at all. It just felt like fun. And you know, the only problem with romance for me is that I don't like to write long books. My books tend to be short. My YA is around 40,000 words. My literary fiction, and other things are around 60,000. And then this book just kept going. And I was like, please stop. My crops are dying. And they were like, no, we have feelings. And it kept going. Honestly, by the time I stopped the book, they weren't done. They still had like more stuff to do. And I was like, we're stopping here. I was like, I cannot do, this is 80,000 words. I'm done. This is the longest book I've ever written. And unfortunately, the thing that I have taken with me is that I keep writing romance, and I wasn't planning to. I was going to go into my fantasy novel, which I was working on, and then I had a dream. This book also came from a dream, but I had a dream, and I was like, oh, this is a novella. I'll just write a quick 40,000 words. That was like a few months ago. And then I looked up, and it was 77,000 words long, and I was like, oh, you're another romance novel. Great. Fantastic. This one is the one I wrote. It's like a speculative romance, Black Southern Gothic. We'll talk about it in a few months. But I think that's the thing that kind of pulls me along. It feels like a current.
Yeah.
It's like a fun current. It's like, why don't you want to come into these people's, messy romantic lives and all the tangled up stuff and all the sex scenes? And it's like, you don't have to be on Twitter. You don't have to be in the world. You could just be here with us. It's great.
Yes. How do you navigate your dreams? Because you just mentioned dreams. In a podcast, you mentioned your dreams are very cinematic, and so are mine. So I'm curious how you relate to and or work with them.
I lucid dream, which is,
A mark of genius, from what I understand.
I mean, also a mark of childhood trauma.
Yes, okay.
And CPTSD. But I started when I was like around 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Because I would get trapped in horrific nightmares that I couldn't get out of. And when I was really young, inside my dream, I realized that if I could imagine a spoon, like just a spoon, there's a little metal spoon floating in the void. It didn't belong to the dream. So I could imagine the spoon and be like, this doesn't belong here, and I would wake up. And so I taught myself how to wake up from nightmares. And then as I got older, honestly kept having nightmares, I also learned how to control my dreams. And then later on, I found out that that's just called lucid dreaming. But what it means is that when I have these like cinematic dreams, which are really fun, they're like movies. A lot of my books, a lot of my forthcoming books are like based on them. I had one that's turning into like a fantasy novel where like I woke up and I wrote for 11 hours nonstop. I wrote like 18,000 words in like one sitting.
That's a lot.
Because I was just transcribing the dream, but the dream was so like vivid and complex that I just kept going. It was like scene after scene after scene, and I was like, this is a lot. But there's gonna be a book, so I was like, hey.
Maybe I need a little bit of that right there.
What was the word that you used when we talked last time about that space before you fall asleep, where you can like
Dreamstorming.
Dreamstorming.
It's like brainstorming, but it's that space right before you fall asleep. The thing is, you can't actually fall asleep. That's you got to like train
You'll
yourself
lose it.
to get up and write it down, and then you can go to sleep.
I experienced it also like coming out.
Yeah.
That's like the lucid dreaming part where
Yeah.
it's like I was in a dream and I couldn't control it, and then I start waking up and then I gain control, and then I can dreamstorm, and I can make myself stay there and loop through it enough so that I can remember it when I'm fully awake. And then as soon as I'm awake, I have to write it down or I have to like record it in a voice note to a friend, because if I don't, it's not gonna stay.
Writers are weird. We're just so bizarre. When people run from grief, they normally run alone, all depressed and stuff. Would you say Faye breaks that ideal in her world/book?
That's a good question. I think there are a lot of ways to be accompanied in grief. So, like with her best friend Joy, you don't really see them talking about her grief a lot.
Oops.
But Joy is very much there all the time. And the grief is there, alongside them, and Joy can see it. And I think sometimes that's all the accompanying you need, is someone who can see it and witness it, essentially. Like just to be witnessed in your grief, and to be witnessed by somebody who isn't trying to change it or diminish it or morph it into something else. And I think that's what, if there's anyone who's, stayed with Faye throughout her grief, it's been Joy.
Sorry, I got so into what you were saying, I wasn't paying attention. Which of the worlds you've created would you like to live in today? I want to live in this one, but I want to live in Alam's house.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
And I just want to eat. I want to eat.
Alan lives in like this gorgeous, like tropical modern house up in the mountains.
Yeah.
And he has like farms and an orchard and an infinity pool. It's very nice, and like a lot of art he collects. I would like to live there and just Like Faye can fuck right off.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Alam and I have got it.
Facts. He has to cook, though, is the thing.
I mean, naturally. I mean, but he
has
loves to cook.
Good. Good. It needed to continue.
You've met him.
I have. The things that I felt reading Alan, I was like, this is, wow, I have some respectability politics to unpack. Sheesh.
And not only does he cook, but like he's like a chef, but he also does like pastry. So like you get the best of both.
He would,
The pastry part is very important to me.
yes. I hope he would love me in all of my sizes, as I would be eating my life away there. Absolutely. Hold on, sorry. Advice for young writers.
Ooh, protect your work. So there was this whole thing on Twitter about the young writer and plagiarism, where there was this whole like plagiarism like controversy, and people were being very harsh. And honestly, what it was from my point of view, and this is the part that's relevant, is for young writers who are coming into the industry, no one really tells you, like, no one really tells everyone, and I think specifically young Black writers who don't have as much access to mentorship. For me, when I was entering, one of the very first things I was told in an MFA program by faculty was, do not let anyone have your work until you are happy with it. No one, not your agent, not your publisher, no one, until you're happy with it. Because the only person who's advocating for the integrity of your work is you. Your agent actually isn't, and neither is your publisher. Like, they've got other priorities, selling books, selling more books. Yeah. But the only person who's really there, and the only person who can accurately, like discern whether the work is where it needs to be, is you. And it sounds like such simple advice, but what people don't consider is just the power discrepancy in the industry. So you have like young artists who are coming in, and what people don't know is that it's really hard to say no. It's really, really hard to say no, especially if you're a young Black writer who just got a book deal, never thought you were going to get one, very much feels that weight of the industry saying that you're not supposed to be there, and that you should just be grateful that you're there, and you should do whatever you're told, and you should break yourself apart to sell your book and meet every single expectation, no matter what it does to you. And for the young writer that the controversy was around, that's what had happened. Like, they were rushed. They were rushed to put out a book, and they weren't ready. And everything kind of, blew up from there. And all I could think when like watching everyone like dunk on them was just like, they needed protection and support. And no one, and even in all of that, like no one was even checking if they had protection and support now, And so that's the thing where I'm like, it's a cruel industry, as all of them are. And it's hard to learn how to say no. It's really hard to stand up for yourself and your work, especially when you're standing up to institutions and people who do have the power to affect your career and your livelihood and your ability to pay, your rent and your bills and get health care and, all these things. But when things go to shit, you're the only person that it's going to fall on. And so I think just a little bit of courage in protecting yourself and in protecting the work and understanding that like you're worth it and the work is worth it.
I like that. That's lovely. Tell us about the title, because people are asking, and I know, but I'm like, you have to tell everybody about the title.
So the title is from a song by Florence and the Machine called Hunger. The full lyric is, "Oh, you in all your vibrant youth, how could anything bad ever happen to you? You make a fool of death with your beauty." And I liked it a lot because it contains so much wonder, like so much awe and wonder. Like you're looking at someone and you're saying, you, like, how could anything bad ever happen to you? You're so amazing. And I feel like that is the, like the spark of new love, is looking at somebody with those lenses and finding all the wonder in them. And I think that's what Faye and Alim like have for each other in this book. This is what they discover about each other. So it felt like the perfect title. I actually didn't think it was going to stick because I thought it was too long. And I tried many other titles, and the book was like, nope, I want this one. And I was like, fine. And then it stuck. And then we fit it on the cover. It made me very happy.
Immaculate. And then lastly, what advice, encouragement, etc., do you have for the people here in the audience who are wanting a love like the one you wrote?
Child.
You wrote it.
I mean, I would like some of the advice myself.
I'm just saying.
I think, what would I say? Like, don't settle. You know, I think that's the biggest part.
Yeah.
Because in like the whole romantic landscape, everyone is kind of does this thing of like, oh, you know, be realistic, and you know, no one is perfect, and you know, you can get 80% of what you need from somebody. And I have just been like an incurable romantic my whole life. And I'm like, no, it must be the most passionate, vibrant thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And I mean, and now we understand why I was making people into characters
Yeah.
because I was like, it was so much better. But I think that, you know, the love that is in this book isn't like, a lot of people are calling it like in the reviews, like insta love. And I don't think it is because they don't ignore each other's flaws. Like they're not going into it thinking, oh my goodness, I'm swept up by all these feelings and, you know, this person is perfect. They're very much aware that, you know, the other person is human, is a person, and they're in also like a very, very difficult situation, which is a really hard scenario to kind of keep that whole, you know, rose tinted glasses, that whole blurred effect where you're not looking at the real things. But when you're in kind of like this kind of like crisis situation that they're in, you see like all the ugly sides of things very quickly. And you see how the other person reacts to that. And I think the thing I really liked about their choice was that they weren't even choosing to be in a relationship. They weren't saying, oh, we're going to be together forever. You know, we're going to burn up the world just to be together. They were saying, we're going to try. And we think that there is enough here that is worth trying for. You know, just making the effort. It may not work. And they're not looking at it as something that, you know, if it doesn't work, it's wasted. They're looking at it as, you know, we are each stepping into braver versions of ourselves by trying. And even if it doesn't work, we're still left with that new version of ourselves. You know, we're left with the version of ourselves that found hope again, that believed in love again. And I think that's part of the magic of romance novels, right? Is that it does that thing about like the horizon of possibility where it like expands it. When I came back to romance like as an adult, I remember reading Talia Hibbert's books, and I was just like, what? Like I didn't even realize how much I had stopped believing that love was possible for me because I was deviant in like the regular like dating world and in this like in the mainstream world, and then I read romance novels where it was like, here's this queer person, here's this neurodivergent person. Alyssa Cole has this amazing like romance novel that's about this like Asian guy with autism and a black woman like scientist genius who's in a wheelchair, and they fall in love. And I was just like, it blew open so much more hope for things. And I think that without that hope, it's hard to put in the work. You know, like love is still work, but to have that hope and to kind of be able to hold on to it enough to try, like that's the gift.
That is a perfect place to end. Thank you all for being here. Okay, so
Wow, wasn't that beautiful? Wasn't that beautiful? One more time. And we should thank Nick for wonderful questions. Thank Nick Stone. And so I am going to try to get Akwaeke over to this table on this side. If you already have a book, that's the place to line up. If you need to buy a book from our friends at Greenlight, this is the door to line up at. And we'll take care of you all. And thanks so much for being here. We'll see you outside. Thanks again.